The basement of whose house?
My aunt, across from her was Kreuzberg. Beautiful it was a park. And the caretaker had a huge home there with garden places.
They lived in privilege, standing beside the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. One remained fiercely loyal, defending her husband's name until her dying breath. Another vanished into obscurity, desperately trying to erase her past. But these women weren't just silent spectators. Their stories are filled with defiance, denial, and the consequences of standing too close to power. Today, we're uncovering what happened to the wives of Nazi leaders after World War II. Let's start with Adolf Hitler's wife. Emmy Göring once had it all: wealth, status, and a direct line to Hitler. As the wife of Luftwaffe chief Hermann Göring, she thrived in Nazi high society, hosting lavish parties and claiming the title of First Lady of the Third Reich. But there was one problem: Hitler's actual companion, Eva Braun. Emmy openly dismissed Eva as a mere mistress, believing she deserved the title more. The tension got so bad that Hitler ordered Hermann to keep her in check. While war ravaged Europe, Emmy lived in luxury, surrounded by stolen art, fine jewelry, and the spoils of Nazi looting. She embraced it all without question. But when the Reich collapsed, so did her privileged life. Arrested and sentenced to a year in prison, she emerged to find her wealth stripped and her acting career banned. Unlike some, she never admitted fault, writing a memoir defending her husband. The world, however, had moved on. Emmy spent her final years in quiet obscurity, far from the grandeur she once enjoyed, dying in 1973. Next is Ilsa Hess, who never let go of the Nazi ideology. She wasn't just the wife of Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy. She was a committed believer herself. Unlike many Nazi wives who stayed out of politics, Ilsa was actively involved. She joined the Nazi Party in the early 1920s and remained loyal to its ideals for the rest of her life. Her world changed in 1941 when her husband secretly flew to Scotland, hoping to negotiate peace with Britain. Instead of being praised, he was captured and branded a traitor. Hitler was furious, stripping him of his titles and erasing him from the Nazi leadership. But Ilsa stood by him, refusing to accept his downfall. After the war, she was briefly held in an internment camp, but was soon released. While many Nazi wives tried to distance themselves from the regime, Ilsa did the opposite. She openly supported Stillhilfe, a secret group that helped former SS officers escape justice, and spent decades campaigning for her husband's release from Spandau prison. Even after proof of Nazi crimes became undeniable, she defended her husband, showing him as a patriot who had been wronged. Her son, Wolf Rudiger Hess, followed in her footsteps, insisting his father had been murdered rather than committing suicide in 1987. Unlike Emmy Göring, who faded into obscurity, Ilsa remained politically active in far-right circles. She never renounced her beliefs and never apologized. When she died in 1995 at the age of 95, she was as devoted to National Socialism as the day she joined the Nazi Party. Next up is Magda Goebbels, who wasn't just Joseph Goebbels' wife. She was one of Nazi Germany's most influential women. Before marrying Goebbels, she had been the wife of a wealthy Jewish industrialist, but after their divorce, she fully embraced Hitler's ideology. She became a key figure in the Nazi elite, admired by Hitler and deeply involved in promoting Nazi values. Her marriage, though, was far from perfect. Goebbels was notorious for his affairs, including a highly publicized relationship with Czech actress Lida Barova. Magda was humiliated and even considered divorce, but Hitler forced them to stay together for appearances. As the war collapsed in 1945, Magda made a horrifying choice. She and her family took refuge in Hitler's bunker, unwilling to face life after the Third Reich. On May 1st, she sedated her 6 children, then crushed cyanide capsules in their mouths. Hours later, she and Joseph Goebbels ended their own lives. Their bodies were burned outside the Reich Chancellery to prevent capture. Her decision to kill her own children remains one of the most disturbing acts of devotion to Hitler's regime. Even in its final moments, she refused to accept a future without National Socialism. But we can't forget Lina Heydrich, who wasn't just married to Reinhard Heydrich, she helped shape his rise to power. When he was expelled from the Navy, she pushed him to join the SS, setting him on a path to becoming one of the most feared men in Nazi Germany. As his power grew, so did Lina's privilege. She lived in luxury at their Bohemian estate, where forced laborers worked under brutal conditions. In 1942, everything changed. Heydrich was assassinated by Czechoslovak resistance fighters, and the Nazis responded with mass executions. Lina, however, focused on securing her future, demanding financial compensation. Hitler personally ensured she was well taken care of. After the war, Lina avoided punishment. She convinced the West German government to grant her a pension, claiming her husband had been a naval officer. Incredibly, she later turned part of her estate into a guest house, where she welcomed former Nazis. Until her death in 1985, Lina defended her husband, insisting he was just a soldier doing his duty. She never admitted any guilt, spending her life protecting his legacy and refusing to accept the horrors he helped create. Followed by Hedwig Höss, who lived in comfort while surrounded by death. As the wife of Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, she had everything: servants, fine clothes, and a beautiful villa just outside the camp's gates. But just beyond her garden walls, over 1 million people were being starved, tortured, and murdered. She claimed she didn't know what was happening, but with the smoke from the crematoriums filling the air and the constant cries from inside the camp, that was impossible to believe. Hedwig didn't just live near Auschwitz, she benefited from it. Prisoners worked in her home, forced to cook, clean, and tend to her children while they suffered in the camp. Her family enjoyed stolen goods taken from Jewish victims, their wealth built on the suffering of others. She never questioned where it all came from or what was happening a few yards away. When the war ended, Hedwig and her children fled, hiding under false identities. Unlike her husband, who was caught, convicted, and hanged in 1947, she managed to escape justice completely. She lived out her life quietly, never facing a trial, never admitting guilt. When she died in 1989, she took her secrets with her, having never answered for the horrors she had lived beside. Gerda Bormann was exactly the Nazi regime wanted in a wife. Loyal, obedient, and dedicated to raising the next generation of Nazis. As the wife of Martin Bormann, Hitler's closest advisor, she fully embraced the party's beliefs. She was so committed to the cause that she was awarded the Gold Cross of Honor for having 10 children, a prize given to women who helped expand the so-called Aryan race. Even with her husband's many affairs, including a long-term mistress who also had his children, Gerda stayed loyal, supporting his political ambitions and standing by him until the very end. She never questioned the Reich, never wavered in her support. But when the war ended, everything fell apart. She fled to Italy with her children, hoping to avoid capture, but her health was already failing. She was eventually detained, stripped of her status, and left to deal with the consequences of a world that no longer had a place for her. In 1946, just a year after the war ended, she died of cancer in an Italian prison, alone and forgotten. Martin Bormann had disappeared, later declared dead in absentia, leaving their children orphaned and the family's once powerful name in ruins. Henriette von Schirach was born into Nazi privilege. Her father was Hitler's personal photographer, and her husband, Baldur von Schirach, led the Hitler Youth. She lived in luxury, attending elite parties and socializing with the highest-ranking Nazis. But in 1943, everything changed. While visiting Amsterdam, she saw Jewish families being forced onto trains, terrified and helpless. It shocked her, unlike most in Hitler's circle, who ignored or excused such horrors. Henriette spoke up. At a gathering soon after, she confronted Hitler, questioning the brutality. His response was swift. He was furious and banished her and her husband to Vienna. Overnight, her privileged life was gone. But her moment of defiance came too late. For years, she had thrived under the Nazi regime. It wasn't until she saw the suffering up close that she said anything. After the war, her husband was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but Henriette was never prosecuted. Instead, she spent her later years trying to reshape her story, portraying herself as an innocent caught in history's storm. Many historians remain skeptical. She died in 1992, never fully escaping the shadow of her past. While many Nazi wives tried to distance themselves from their pasts, Annelies von Ribbentrop never wavered. She remained loyal to the Nazi cause until the very end. As the wife of Hitler's foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, Annelies wasn't just along for the ride. She helped steer it. Even before her husband joined the Nazi party, she pushed him towards Hitler, knowing it would bring them power. She thrived in Nazi high society, using her influence to keep her husband in Hitler's good graces. After the war, Joachim was arrested, tried at Nuremberg, and sentenced to death. Annelies fought desperately to defend him, claiming he was misunderstood. When that failed, she focused on reclaiming the wealth the Allies had confiscated, spending years in legal battles and surrounding herself with former Nazi supporters. Unlike other Nazi widows who tried to move on, Annelies never apologized or distanced herself from the regime. She lived until 1973, holding onto her beliefs until the very end. That's all for the wives of Nazi leaders and the lives they led after the fall of the Third Reich. Some clung to their past, refusing to let go of their beliefs. Others tried to erase their history, hoping to escape justice. But no matter how different their paths were, none of them could escape the consequences of standing so close to power. If you're interested in more fascinating history content, make sure to click on the next video.